Hello and welcome to philoscifiz. Today we're going to be talking about Back to the Future Part 2 and also the other two films, to be honest. It's all of them.
Yeah, and spoilers alert. So if that's a problem, check out the film first, check out the trilogy first, and then come back to us. Hello, Matt. How you doing, mate?
I'm okay. How are you, Dave?
I'm super duper. Okay, Back to the Future 2. Back to the Future Part 2. Back to the Future 2. Why did you choose this film?
Because I wanted to do a film that was both fun and clever.
Okay, you telling me Back to the Future 1 is not fun or is not clever or...
Oh, it is, but then I thought this is the most...
funnest and cleverest.
Well, it's not the funnest. The funnest one is the third one. However,
yeah.
I would say it is the most complicated.
Yeah, without a shadow of a doubt. The third one's the most emotional as well. I can't make it through that movie without tears, to be brutally honest.
Oh.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, the third one's is wonderful. Maybe we should have done a third one.
Oh, no turning back now. Yeah,
too late
no turning back. Yeah. Anyway, so fun and complex, the most complex of the three Back to the Future. I think, as we've both intimated there, we both love these films. We love all three of them. I mean, it's not even really three films, is it? People call it a trilogy, but it's part one, part two, part three, and they bleed into each other so well. It's kind of one long, massive 6-hour film, really, at the end of the day. And we're going for the middle segment.
Yeah.
Okay.
Act 2.
Act 2. Come on, tell us what happens.
So, obviously, in the first one, Marty McFly ends up going back in time, causes havoc. Former younger version of the Doc who invented the time machine helps him fix it and then sends him back to the future, hence it being called Back to the Future. I don't know if anyone got that joke. And then everything seems fine, but the Doctor turns up, hit the time machine, which is a DeLorean can fly. He says there's something wrong with your family. That's the end of Back to the Future Part 1. Part 2, they go forward in time, try and stop his son from getting into trouble because this is him going to prison leads to a chain reaction that completely destroys the family unit. Then, while they're there, the antagonist, Biff, manages to take the time machine and change the past in 1955 for his own gain, which creates a new alternate, horrible 1985. It isn't 85, isn't it?
It's 85,
That's where it's set. Yeah, so alternate 85, they're present, they go there, it's terrible. So they have to go back to 1955 again, entering into scenes from the first film in order to restore it to the changed future in Back to the Future Part 1. Getting back to equilibrium.
The scenes in the Enchantment Under the Sea dance in the second film, where you've got different, double Marty McFly. They're as complex as any art house European art film you'll ever see. That blew me away as a kid when I watched it. It still blows me away now. Love it.
Where did he go? Come on, man. He just came in here. Something really cooked. Look, how'd he get up on stage? I don't know, but when he gets down, we're gonna nail him.
How the hell he changes clothes so fast?
Okay, Back to the Future 2. So let's discuss. This is going to be difficult, right? But let's see if we can slightly unpick some of these different timelines. And I suppose the reason I think it's worth doing that is because, and this is before...
You're working on a wiki article.
That might be an idea. I suppose that the reason we should do this is just to confront the way Doc puts it. So in the second film, we get Doc explain to Marty when they get back to this, what they call the alternate 1985. Okay. And he explains to Marty what's gone wrong with a diagram on a chalkboard. And without trying to describe that, he basically sets up the kind of dichotomy that there is a real 1985 and an alternate 1985. And what they need to do is go back in time, find out when it is. They don't know when it's been changed yet. Go back there, and thus they can restore the real 1985, the original 1985. However, and this means we're going to have to talk just for a second about the first film. However, that's not the original 1985, because what happens in the first film, they start in 1985. Marty gets catapulted back in time to 1955. Him arriving in 1955 changes that 1955. So we've already got 1955A. All of the events that happen in that film, where his mother falls in love with him and he has to get his mother to fall back in love with his father, yeah, which he does successfully. And then he finally gets back to 1985. Yeah, that isn't a restored 1985. That's a different 1985. His father is now an author with his first book arrives. His mother is not on the gin so much. And his siblings seemingly have got things more together. It's a very 1980s movie feeling of they've actually this is words they use, they're no longer losers. So we're already at the beginning of Back to the Future 2. We're already in 1985A. Yeah.
Yeah.
So they get carted off. They create another 2015 because they intervene there. Biff goes back to 1955 and then returns to 2015. So there's new 1955s generated, new 2015s developed. So by the fact when they get back to 1985, the dystopian 1985, let's call it, it's already at least 1985C. Yeah, it's a very different kind of 1985 already. And then, of course, they've got to go back to 1955, creating a new one there, so on and so forth. So what we see in this film is a really, really complicated set of, let's call them parallel timelines being generated, proliferating. Yeah. So that's my view, right? Doc's solution between the real and the alternate just doesn't work. What do you think?
Well, I think that it would be interesting to talk about it from their perspectives. So the Doc that we get at the end of Back to the Future Part 1 is at the very least Doc Brown A, because he's lived through the timeline where Marty's family are a success. Although there is a moment in the first film where it's just before Marty gets into the time machine for the lightning strike moment, where Marty says, "Oh, my dad stood up to Biff. He's never done that in his life." And the Doc sort of looks at the camera for a moment and thinks, "Oh," and there's a kind of a recognition that might have changed the timeline. But the Doc that survives, the Doc that's not killed by the Libyan assassins, the Libyan terrorists, hasn't lived through the original 1985. So I think it's perfectly natural for him to call the 1985 they're trying to restore the real 1985, because it's the one that he experienced, the one that he went through, and the one that's real to him.
So what you seem to be appealing to here, and I now you say that, I think that's absolutely valid, is a relative space-time consciousness continuum that's activated through the film. Because for as I say, for Marty, things will have changed, but for Doc, as you quite rightly said, they won't have. So for one, it's 1985. The other, it's 1985A.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Yep, I buy that. Absolutely.
You're late. You have no concept of time. Hey, come on. I had to change. You think I'm going back in that suit? The old man really came through. It worked. What? He laid out Biff in one punch. I didn't know he had it in him. He's never stood up to Biff in his life. Ever? No, why? What's the matter? All right.
I suppose the other thing to talk about is the difference between the two films. They both explore one of the standard kind of scientific time travel problems, so to speak. And even though I think we just need to address this briefly before we move on. But the first film is really the grandparent paradox. Yeah, if which is stated, if you were to go back in time and kill I don't know why we have to always kill, but this film's far nicer. It's got, even if a bit more Oedipal, go back in time and, disturb your grandparents, you might not be born. So it explores
Well,
that.
I mean, in Oedipus, he kills the ancestors as well.
Oh, yeah, there's death everywhere, isn't there? Good point.
Yeah.
In the second film, it's more the Bootstrap Paradox, which is the other one. Yep. If you go into the future and discover and pick up the novel that you've written 20 years later and bring it back so you can give it to yourself to write again earlier, who actually wrote that novel? Because you're copying something, that doesn't actually exist for you in that time. So they're both kind of exploring these paradoxes and find their own solutions to them.
Yes.
And this is my claim with time travel movies. I mean, that's a very scientific kind of viewpoint, and the way in which they can be solved is talking about the many worlds theorem. So you're not actually going back in time. I think that's undone by this film in many ways, particularly the enchantment under the sea, where you do get all of these paths collide with each other. But to me, time travel in cinema is never about the possibility of time travel. Yeah. I mean, it has to be just a given moment, right? Yeah. In order that you can explore time, what I would call, I mean, this is why I love time travel stuff. I'm biggest Doctor Who lover there is, almost.
You can't say things like that.
Okay. All right. I'm a big Doctor Who lover.
You can't say that.
Can I say I'm a big Doctor Who lover?
Fan. You're a fan.
I don't use that word. I'm a big Doctor Who lover, and the reason I love Doctor Who is because it's about visceral encounters with time, and it seems to me that there are different kind of encounters. In other words, when you travel back to the past, right, and you travel to the future from a present moment, those two encounters with time are affectively, qualitatively different encounters with the nature of time. What I mean by that is, if you go back to the past, what you're exploring there usually is history, memory, stuff that is, if you like, set in stone, that you might not know everything about it, so you're discovering it, you might problematize it, but that in a sense, those films are all about healing time in a way. Yep. Because something's gone wrong or you've got to put it right. And there's almost like a given moment that you're exploring. Whereas traveling into the future, is more an encounter with the unknowable, with possibilities, with your greatest fears, so to speak. Yep. Or your greatest hopes even. So they're very different temporal journeys. Yeah, which to me has got nothing to do with the scientific notion of time travel and grandfather, grandmother paradoxes, grandparent paradoxes, bootstrap paradoxes, all of this, that, and the other. They're the mechanics, the material you're playing with. But for me, the real thing about time travel movies is their affective dimensions with encounters with the past and future, and indeed encounters with the present as well. So we get encounters in the second film with a different present, with an alternative present, and that in itself has got a different kind of feel, because that's where everything's at stake in this film, isn't it? In Back to the Future too, the vital flow of life has somehow been redirected, moved. So Marty's father has died, much younger than he would have liked, and his mother is now slightly enhanced, let us say, and his stepdad is Biff, his mortal enemy, so to speak. So the present
across all time and space.
There we go.
It is interesting that his father's high school buddy becomes his sort of multi-generational spatio-temporal nemesis.
Hey, McFly! Yeah, I've seen you around. You're Marty McFly's kid, aren't you? Biff? You're Marty Jr. Tough break, kid. Must be rough being named after a complete butthead.
What's that supposed to mean?
Hello? Hello, anybody home? Huh? Think, McFly, think! Your old man? Mr. Loser?
What? That's right. Loser with a capital L.
But yeah, so that's my view on the time travel, that it, we can push aside, we'll leave time travel as a problem and as paradoxes to the scientists. Yep, all very good. But from a philosophical and artistic point of view, more to speak, it would be around affective dimensions. Okay.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that's really cool. I think that this film's more conservative than that. So I think I think you're right that there's sort of a map of how time travel can work in cinema. I think that's true, and I think you can read these films like that. But I think really, it's less about time travel; it's more about family and legacy and generations and things like that. I mean, I can't think of off the top of my head a time travel sci-fi story that sticks to the idea of family and traveling back into earlier versions of family as much as this does. So what you've kind of got is different stages of the family. You've got so the McFly family. You've got the three generations. You've got George McFly's generation, Marty McFly, and then Marty's children. And what you have in Back to the Future Part 1 is George's failure to stand up to that bully, which sort of sends his entire family on sort of a lesser destiny. You've got Marty's failure to get control of his anger and his emotions, his ability to be provoked, so he ends up in a car crash. George McFly can't become a sci-fi writer. Marty McFly doesn't become a famous rock star, and that leaves his family in a sort of a lesser destiny. And what happens through the film is those two patriarchs working together in order to restore or bring the family to where it should have been. So Marty goes back in time and helps his father find confidence to stand up to his bully, which means he becomes the sci-fi author.
Yeah, but what's that should mean? What does that should? There is no should until it happens.
Oh no, it should from the morality of the film. What the direction of the film says should be the case. He should be successful as possible. You should live your dreams. You should stand up against corruption instead of being sort of mowed over by it. That I think is the message of the two films.
I mean, I mentioned earlier that it is a very 1985 movie in the fact of the return, and they're more successful than they were called losers before. So I agree with that.
But we should mention that there was controversy with Crispin Glover leaving the project because of that.
What do you mean? What do you mean because of that?
So part of from his account, part of the reasons Crispin Glover left the project was because he felt it was too capitalistic,
right, okay,
too Reaganite a way of viewing what family success was.
So Crispin Glover, the guy who played George, Marty's father, yeah.
So he leaves the project.
I didn't know it was. So that's his reason he gave her.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, who knows what actually happened there?
I mean, I don't disagree with that. I think that's an absolute reading. However, I mean, the idea that you return to 1955, a golden age of America, the rise of the teenager, a time that of simpler pleasures, blah blah blah, all of this, that, and the other. I get that trope. But the trouble is, every cultural critic that's ever been, whenever there's a film set in the 1950s, says that. So it's become a kind of a cliche. But I take it to a point. But the 1985 piece, I do agree with. I think, however, they begin to address that in the second film. I think they address that really, really well. They explore that moment in the dystopian present, and I'll tell you. Do you want me to tell you why I think that?
Go on.
Well, Biff Tower, right? Biff Tower, living on the 27th floor, the penthouse at the top. I mean, that's Trump Tower, isn't it? Trump Tower was opened in.
It looks like Trump. It's weird. It's almost like Trump. I mean, he was already an adult, obviously, when this film came out, but it's almost like he saw this film and was like, yeah.
Or the filmmakers are reflecting on that. I think it is Trump Tower. Trump Tower opened in 1983. Yeah, the first film's made in 85. This film is made in 1989. Yeah, Trump is a big presence.
Right. Okay. I don't know anything about how Trump was as a cultural figure.
Well, I mean, think of the we've just had him. People trying to think about having him removed from one of the Home Alone films, haven't they? Where he runs into it, where he insisted he come in. So he's well known in the media at this point. He's indeed even cajoling to get little bits into films and cameos and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I think the second film, in a sense, is reflecting upon that capitalist moment, because what is Biff but an uber capitalist? I mean, what does he say at one point when he's going to shoot Marty? I own the police. So I mean, look, this is not I'm not saying that Back to the Future is a Nostradamus kind of film. I'm talking about how it's reflecting upon 1985 or the 1980s itself, and it's aware, I think, of that problem of the first film, of the conservative capitalist successful drive. I think it's aware of that and reflects upon it in the second film.
In a sense, but what Biff is a capitalist untempered by family values. And the film even establishes that. I mean, why hasn't he got family values? Because he seems to have grown up in a broken home. For whatever reason, he's being brought up by his grandmother, who is just this shouting voice that you never see, that he's arguing with. He's not had the nuclear family, and as such, So if you sort of look at Back to the Future Part 2 as the battle between Biff's dominance and the McFly's dominance of the timeline. One of them just so George McFly's dominance leads to him presumably just looking after his family, doing what he wants, living the American dream, whereas Biff's has to involve the destruction of the McFly family because he wants to be with the mother. So it's not the capitalism that's the problem with Biff. It's not his riches, although there is a kind of don't do this for personal gain thing going on. It's the lack of respect for the marriage that's supposed to take place between George and
Lorraine.
Yeah, between George and Lorraine.
I think that plays into it as well. I mean, neither of us are going to say that any one film is about any one thing. I take your point with I like the idea of the Tannen and McFly dynasties and how they're intertwined. It does become a bit of a zero-sum game, doesn't it? Because in the first film, when we meet Biff, he's, if you like, the first time we meet him, he's George's boss. In the second time we meet him at the end of the film, now he's cleaning cars, and the idea is that when one triumphs, the other must lose. There's no lifting up together. There is one triumphs, one loses. Is that critical of the whole capitalistic system in a sense as well, though? Yeah, rather because if it was trumping capitalism, the idea would be we can all lift each other up. It would be a ringing endorsement of those. Where the film actually seems to unpick. It's not. This isn't a modernist art film unpicking something from a hard left, but it sees the problems that are inherent into this, even if it doesn't appear to be critical about those things. It explores those problems.
I mean, I would say it certainly explores them, but I think it is also interesting looking at some of the conservative aspects of it. That's a small C. Yeah,
no, I mean, I think they're absolutely prevalent. I mean, the other one you mentioned is about the family. And I think you're right. That's what I was kind of pointing to when I was talking about the different effects and going back in time. It's looking at their, at the history, at the memory of the family and exploring that.
He's a peeping Tom.
I believe that the film was originally inspired by the writer Gale, thinking about coming across an old school yearbook. We don't have that in the UK, this sort of stuff in the UK. I don't know what they're called. Where his father was, and finding out he was head boy. I don't know what they call it in America either. Prefect, whatever. And saying, I don't think I'd have got on with my father. And the idea was to travel back in time and see what that, because the first film was conceived on its own, and then the success led to exploring other things. So I think there's a kind of the point you've raised about the family is absolutely central and key. And I think we should sort of like get into discussing that. But first, in a sense, what I want to do before we discuss the family is talk about the technology and how they do this. So from a filmic perspective, because this to me, it's absolutely phenomenal, right? So in in Back to the Future 2, in 2015, when through the machinations of the plot, Marty, our main character's generation, meets and encounters the later generation. We get a proliferation of characters. So Michael J. Fox plays Marty McFly, and in 2015, he's thus playing Marty McFly, but he's also playing himself, several years older, who now known as Marty McFly Sr. He's also playing his son, Marty McFly Jr. He's also playing his daughter, Marlene. We've got Jennifer playing herself and also playing her middle-aged self. We've got old George, old Lorraine, old Biff, and Biff's grandson, Griff. I mean, they're all of these characters. They're playing multiple characters, and lots of them are in the same scene together. Now, this has happened in cinema, on TV for quite a long time, and usually the way to do it is one of two ways. You've got to have a really steady camera that you don't move, and you perform the actions twice, and you can edit it together, or you can have two cameras pointing in two different directions and mix them live and bring the two things together. So both optical compositing.
Yeah.
What's really done beautifully here and is the way in which the camera moves and can move in a way that you would use it filmically, and the multiple characters can move within it. And this was due to the creation of the Vista Slide technology, which came out of ILM, that's Industrial Light and Magic, George Lucas's special effects unit that was set up, I think, in 1975. I think it was set up in 1975 as a division of Lucasfilm in order to get on top of and develop the technology for doing Star Wars. Most of which was non-digital in that sense, but they were bringing digital in at that point. And just the way in which the camera moves around those scenes. I mean, even one of the bits it's quite small, but it's when in 1955, when young Biff meets old Biff himself, and one's in the car and one's not. The camera just glides in slowly. The camera's moving, and there is no sense that these are two different shots and two different. Perhaps my favourite one is when the two docs meet. And they both, our doc has got his back to the other doc. Oh, cripes, I don't know what. And they hand over an item. It's done cleverly using the lamppost as a way of shielding and passing something across. Who knows how it's done? But it's just beautifully done, those moments. And then, of course, the pièce de résistance of the Vista Slide motion capture is the dining table when the McFly family are all sitting down to lunch, and we've got Marty, I've forgotten the name of the actor, Michael J. Fox, playing three characters sat at that table. It's just awesome, isn't it?
I didn't actually realise it was Michael J. Fox playing his daughter until last night when I was watching it with my housemate, and he pointed it out. Kudos to Michael J. Fox and the makeup department then. I think mainly the makeup department.
Oh boy, Mom, you sure can hydrate a pizza. No, I'm sorry, I missed that whole thing.
Al, I'm just worried about Jennifer. Why isn't she home yet?
I'm not sure where Jennifer is, Mom. Should have been home hours ago, but I'm having a hard time keeping track of these days.
Fruit,
please.
Thank you. Aren't you and Jennifer getting along?
Oh, yeah, great, Mom. We're like a couple of teenagers, you know? Dad, telephone, it's needles.
Dad, it's for you.
See, to me, this aspect of the film is the most enjoyable. These characters in altered states. And I think this is where, if you like, the affirmation of the films comes back in. I mean, what you've got is a fracturing of subjectivity, yep, across time, across space, the different times, the different spaces, yep, they resonate. You've got alternative universes overwriting each other. In the Enchantment Under the Sea dance, you've got kind of an intensive moment where the characters are kind of choreographed and dancing around each other. So you've got these temporal and spatial kind of problems generating no closure. There's no closure in this film at any point. Yep. I mean, I think that the notion of closure within cinema is highly overused. And particularly this film, if you consider, like we talked about with Back to the Future 1, yep, the 1985 they returned to is not the same as the one they left from. I mean, that's no closure. They haven't returned, they haven't restored anything. Even if it is the same timeline from Doc's point of view, from at least one point of view, and from the spectator's point of view, things have changed. Yeah, and it seems to me these ideas of this kind of fractured eye and these selves that dissolve, as we see in the photograph or in the first film. But of course, when new eyes come back and new people are generated in alternative spaces, those old selves have dissolved back in the past. Yep. And the idea that it also collapses the idea of the other. So if we just think about the way in which our Marty meets, or we encounter at the filmic level anyway, Marty become Marty Senior. Yep. We're othering the characters from ourselves. It's that old. I think it's Visconti, the Italian director, said, we are a very Bergsonian kind of notion of time, of duration, of our subjectivity. It's not that we are these different compartmentalized people throughout our lives, but we are simultaneously a child. We are simultaneously a teenager. We're simultaneously middle-aged. We're simultaneously old. These are kind of like layers and sheets that build up. We fracture and then we overlay. And I think the film is very, very good at exploring the disjunctive nature, the crisis of time and space, but pulling it back to the subject, to the person. And, just to conclude, I'd say it holds the banner, "We are multiple," high above its head, this whole series.
I presume you're conducting some sort of weather experiment.
That's right. How did you know that?
Oh, I happen to have had a little experience in this area.
Yes. Well, I'm hoping to see some lightning tonight, although the weatherman says there's not going to be any rain.
Well, there's going to be plenty of rain, all right. Wind, thunder, lightning. It's going to be one hell of a storm.
Well, thanks. Nice talking to you. Maybe we'll bump into each other sometime again in the future.
Or in the past.
Looking at it as three films about family helps make some sense of it. So the first film, we usually look at it from Marty's perspective. So he accidentally goes back in time and then accidentally makes his life better. But if we look at it from George's perspective, what's happened is his son, the next generation, has come to the present from the future and helped him become a stronger person. Sort of like the force of his family sort of teams up and crushes his enemy and allows him to self-actualize in a way that he wasn't able to on his own, that he wasn't able to get that support. And it comes out of the strength of his family, the two generations working together. And so the first film creates the McFly dynasty as it could have been if George had had support from the morality of the film from another masculine influence who wasn't toxic. Now, the second film is consolidating that dynasty. So the threat, Biff, challenges it, goes back to that battlefield of 1955, which the Doc talks about. Could it be a coincidence, or is it some sort of temporal nexus?
Yeah, it's fate. Is it fate? I mean,
Yeah.
it plays with that. That's really good. Yes.
Yeah, so it goes back, and then he teams up with his self from a more selfish or self-aimed position. He clearly doesn't get on with his grandson, and so he goes back in time and treats his own self like a grandson. And then what you get is two Biffs working together using their force of their sort of life force, and then they create their own dynasty, which crushes the McFly one. And then Marty has to undo that and defend the new dynasty that he created. Except in this one, he is on his own. The Doc sort of has got him there, but the Doc's not really offering that much support. He can't interact with his father this time. So really, the second one is the one where Marty is most alone and has to resolve it in his own way. And then at the end of that film, the McFly dynasty is almost secured, apart from the outstanding issue about does Marty break his hand and then stop becoming presumably a rock star.
Yeah.
In order to get out of the rut that trying to, getting his son out of prison. Really, I mean, the Doc talks about how he's traced down what happened to his dynasty, the full family that he's gone all the way back, and he's figured out. So I mean, it's clear that the Doc's been to more than just 2015. He's gone much further into the future because he's really concerned about Marty's children and the family and how that develops. He said, no, this is the crisis point. But really, arguably, the crisis point, which the Doc doesn't realize, is the point which is only seen in the third film, which is when Needles, played by Flea from
Red Hot Chili Peppers.
Yeah, who's also in the second film as someone who encourages Marty by calling him yellow and
chicken.
And a coward.
Oh yeah, chicken.
Yeah, chicken. That's it, chicken. Yeah.
Brilliant.
So it's sort of this hot-headedness that Marty has. Now he needs to grow out of that because that's gonna be his mistake.
Yes.
Yeah. Whereas George McFly's mistake, if you can call it that, is failing to stand up to Biff. Marty McFly's mistake is standing up too much. So it's sort of like the hot-headedness that he brings and helps his father with elevates him. Whereas Marty needs to calm down, and it's his experience in the Wild West that does that. But really, that's like an ancillary point in the third film. The third film is about giving the Doc a family because the Doc doesn't have one. All the Time Machine does, in the way that they're using it, is about family. In the first two films, it's used in order to support and defend the McFly family, and in the third one, it's used to create the Doc Brown dynasty with Jules and Vern and Clara, who gets saved from falling into a ravine by the intervention of the Time Machine.
Absolutely, I think that's spot on, and the point about Doc's family, there's a whole theme. I mean, you get this quite a lot throughout the second film. We need to destroy the Time Machine because it caused too many temporal problems. In the third film, the Doc discovers his heart, and he says that sentence again, but in a very different way. He goes, "Traveling through time is too painful." This is when he thinks he has to give up Clara and all of this. So again, that pushes us back away from the time travel as a scientific problem, back towards the affective dimensions to it. And as you've most eloquently gone over there, I think it's about the family unit and about family legacies and about the past of families and the future of families. Beautiful.
And then there's that closing point that seems to contradict the entire trilogy, where Jennifer gives the Doc the blank page that was the "you're fired" facts. He doesn't know anything about Marty getting fired. He's just going, yeah, of course it hasn't. Of course it's changed. He knows that she's brought something from the future, and that's been altered by interventions. And by this point, presumably, I mean, okay, he's been gone, or he's experienced at least as much time to raise those children to that age. I'm not good at children, but are they like 5 or something?
I'd go 7 and 4, something like that.
Okay, so he's best part of a decade. He's been away. He's come back, and he's like, actually, do you know what? It doesn't matter. Your future is just created in the present anyway. And it's a total rejection of the efforts to try and fix things throughout the other films. And You've got to fix things that are bad for you and your family, but that doesn't mean you're in any way securing a future, because there's always things that can happen, always things that can go wrong.
The unknowable.
The unknowable, but it's also the certainty that you can't make anything certain.
Yeah.
It's total contingency of everything. I think I'd say contingent rather than unknowable. And at this point, Doc just seems to be affirming everything's contingent. So it sort of puts the films in a new light that it's not that we can use the time machine to fix all of our problems. It creates them as well. But if you're confronted with a problem, you've got to try and fix it, especially if it's a problem of something happening to your family.
Dr. Brown, I brought this note back from the future, and now it's erased.
Of course it's a race!
But what does that mean?
It means your future hasn't been written yet. No one's has. Your future is whatever you make it. So make it a good one. Both of you.
We will, Doc.
So, Dave, is there anything else you wanted to talk about?
I suppose I want to talk about the low stakes of the series, but also of this film. We sometimes get in science fiction about the apocalypse and the end of the universe and all of this. And I think the second film plays with that really, really well in a couple of places. There's a bit when Jennifer has been brought from 1985 into 2015 and gets returned to the family home. And she's in danger of meeting herself at an older age. And the doc says, well, one of two things could happen. She could faint, or there could be a massive cataclysm. So, as we see on screen, when the two Jennifers do meet, they beautifully faint. Doc repeats this again when Marty's just about to go to the enchantment under the sea. You know, if you two meet, you could destroy the universe. Marty repeats it at one point. But we kind of know that the Doc is kind of like got that wrong because of the earlier scene. And to me, it's the low stakes. I mean, we've talked about this film being about families and the memories of families and the future of families and the family history. And I think that's what it does. In a sense, it's a very local disruption. There's lowish stakes throughout the whole film. And I think that's why it works so well. And that's why it's so beautiful, because it's not the whole universe under threat, despite the Doc fearing the worst.
No, I really like that too.
What about you, Matt? Anything you would like to say to finish off with?
So I only realised this last night when I watched it, but I think Jennifer's having an affair.
What?
In 2015. So there's just this line where Lorraine says to Marty, where's Jennifer? And he says, don't know where she is. It's hard to keep track of her these days. And, she's later than she's sort of expected to be there. I think she's having an affair. And I say, good for her, because she is treated terribly in this film. She's brought into this car, she's knocked out immediately and left on a pile of trash.
Yeah, that's not nice.
Gets picked up by the cops. And then, it's really odd because they've brought her along, but they treat her as a problem until they finally get rid of her and drop her off at home. And then she wakes up, obviously, in the third film. And, all of these things have happened to her. And I just think, at least in that timeline, good for her, because, she's worth better than Marty.
Yeah, well, I don't know what senior Marty's going to be like, but I don't think it's going to bode well for the family, no matter what they do. He's a bit of a jerk.
He is a bit of a jerk.